The desert wind carried the stench of death, sharp and bitter under the burning Nevada sun. Elias Granger, a lone cowboy and bounty hunter, pushed open the creaking door of an abandoned cabin, expecting stolen gold or desperate outlaws. Instead, the sight froze his blood. A girl no older than 13 sat chained to a skeleton. Her hair was matted, her dress in rags, and her ankle raw from the iron shackle. Yet her eyes were calm, far too calm for a child in hell. When she finally whispered, the words cut like a knife. "He was my father." In that instant, Elias knew he hadn't just found a cabin, he had stepped into a nightmare that would change both their lives forever. For 3 days, Elias Granger had tracked the faint trail across the Nevada desert, his canteen nearly empty. When the sagging cabin finally emerged from the haze, leaning against the wind like it could fall at any moment, something in his gut told him to stop. Something stopped him. The stillness wasn't right. The desert was never silent. Wind carried the whispers of sand and the distant cries of hawks. But here, it was as if the air itself was holding its breath. His horse snorted, pawing the ground, reluctant to approach. That's when the smell hit him, sickly and metallic, like death left to bake under the relentless sun. He dismounted, his boots sinking into the dry, cracked earth. The door of the cabin sagged on rusted hinges, and when he touched it, the wood felt damp with years of neglect. Inside, light slanted through broken boards, illuminating a single room coated in dust and decay. In the far corner, a small figure sat perfectly still. For a moment, Elias thought his eyes were deceiving him, a mirage born of exhaustion and heat. Then the figure shifted, and chains clinked softly against bone. The sight carved into his memory. A girl, frail and dirt-streaked, shackled by the ankle to a skeleton. Her hair clung to her face in dark strands, her dress torn and colorless. But her eyes stopped him cold. They weren't the eyes of a panicked child. They were steady, unblinking, as if she had spent years staring into the abyss and found nothing left to fear. Elias took a cautious step forward, his spurs barely whispering against the dusty floor. "Easy, sweetheart," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I'm not here to hurt you." The girl didn't move, but her lips trembled, forming words cracked by disuse. "He was my father." A shiver rolled through Elias despite the heat. He glanced at the skeleton. Its clothes had long since rotted away, the bones brittle and sun-bleached. Someone had placed dried flowers around it, as if the girl had been trying to give death some dignity. In that moment, the bounty, the gang, the gold, none of it mattered. He was standing in the middle of someone else's nightmare, and he could feel it closing around him like a noose. Elias Granger stayed perfectly still, letting the silence of the one-room cabin stretch around him like a suffocating shroud. Dust motes floated in the sunbeams, slicing through the broken boards, glinting like fragments of forgotten memories. He'd seen a lot on the frontier, men shot dead over a hand of cards, cattle rustlers hanged at dawn, women weeping over fresh graves, but nothing prepared him for this. The girl, Clara Wynne, though he didn't yet know her name, sat cross-legged on the dirt floor. Her thin arms were wrapped around her knees, the iron chains snaking from her ankle to the skeleton's wrist like a grotesque umbilical cord. Elias noticed her skin, raw and scabbed where the shackle had rubbed it bloody. She had been here a long time. He knelt slowly, careful not to startle her, and set his hat on the floor. "I'm Elias," he said softly, his voice carrying the gravel of the trail. "What's your name?" The girl hesitated as though tasting the words before letting them escape. "Clara," she whispered. "Clara Wynne." Elias felt the name sink in. He'd heard it before. Jedediah Wynne, the infamous outlaw, wanted in 3 territories for bank robbery and murder. The bounty posters were yellowed now, forgotten by most lawmen. But Elias had memorized faces like that. He looked at the skeleton, at the tattered scraps of clothing that clung to the brittle frame. It had to be him. He didn't ask how long she'd been there. He could already guess, and the answer would turn his stomach. Instead, he glanced at the skeleton, and then at the little piles of things around it. Bits of fabric, dried flowers, shards of glass that caught the sunlight. It was a shrine, cobbled together with a child's desperate love. "Clara," he said gently, "why are you still here?" She blinked slowly, her lips trembling. Papa told me to stay. He said if I left, bad men would come. Bad men. They wanted his gold. He said I had to guard his bones, or the buzzards would take him. Elias's chest tightened. He'd heard of frontier superstitions, of promises made to the dead, but this was something deeper. This was loyalty chained by trauma. She wasn't just protecting bones. She was protecting the last thread of family she had. He glanced around the cabin again, taking in the details he'd missed before. The walls bore scratches, as if someone had clawed at them in the last moments of life. There were old food tins stacked in a corner, long empty. A cracked water barrel held nothing but dust. Somehow this child had survived in conditions that would have killed most grown men. "Clara," he said quietly, leaning closer, "there aren't any bad men here now. You don't have to stay in this place anymore." Her head snapped toward him with sudden, sharp awareness. "You don't understand. They're always coming back. I hear them sometimes. The horses, the voices." Her eyes flicked to the window, wide and haunted. "If I leave, they'll take me. Papa said so." Elias exhaled slowly. He'd tracked men like that, wolves in human skin. And if any were still alive, the gold of Jedediah Wynn would be like blood in the water. "Listen to me," he said, his voice firmer now. "Whatever your father told you, he's gone. But you're alive. You don't have to die here to keep his secret." Her fingers tightened around a piece of bone, one of the skeleton's arm bones. He realized she had been stroking it absent-mindedly, like a talisman. The sight made his stomach twist. She had lived with the dead so long that life felt like the real danger. The desert wind whistled through a crack in the wall, and somewhere far off a hawk cried. In that moment, Elias felt the weight of the frontier, the endless miles of land where law and mercy often came too late. He thought about all the children he'd seen orphaned by greed and violence. Some survived, many didn't. He spoke softly but firmly, as if trying to anchor her to the present. "Clara, I'm going to help you, but you need to tell me something. Did your father leave anything behind? Anything the bad men want?" Her eyes flickered to the skeleton, then back to him. She didn't speak, but the answer was clear in the way her hand trembled on the bones. Elias felt a cold certainty creep into his gut. Whatever secret this child was protecting had already cost her everything. And in the desert, secrets had a way of calling death to your door. The afternoon sun hung low, bleeding copper light into the desert as Elias Granger crouched by the cabin window. His instincts had kept him alive for years, and now every nerve in his body screamed that trouble was coming. At first it was faint, a dull thud carried on the wind. Then it grew clearer. Hoofbeats. Clara Wynn froze where she sat, her small hands gripping the skeleton as if it could shield her from the world. Her voice cracked with terror. "They're back," she whispered. "Papa said they always come back." Elias scanned the horizon through a sliver of broken wood. 5 riders emerged from the desert haze, silhouettes cutting through the glare, like a line of vultures in human form. Even from a distance, Elias could recognize the posture of men who live by the gun, loose in the saddle, scanning everything, always ready to kill. And leading them was a face Elias hadn't seen in over a decade, Rufus Kane. The sight hit him with a strange, bitter weight. Once he'd known that boy as his blood. Danny Kane, the nephew who'd followed him everywhere, wide-eyed and eager, back before the world taught him that law was a thin thread in the desert. But the boy he remembered was gone. The man riding toward the cabin was a predator draped in dust and gunsmoke. "Clara," Elias said, his voice low and firm, "get away from the window. Don't move. Don't make a sound." He watched the riders approach, the hoofbeats growing louder, rhythmic and inevitable. His hand hovered near his Colt, and for the first time in years he felt the weight of hesitation. Killing strangers was one thing, drawing on your own kin was another. The riders dismounted, boots sinking into the dry earth. The leader, Rufus, strode toward the cabin with the casual confidence of a man who had stared death in the eye and stopped flinching years ago. He didn't knock. His boots slammed into the door, sending it crashing open with a violent crack. "Well, well." Rufus's voice was rough, sun-scorched, but carried a note of amusement. "Uncle Elias, I didn't think I'd ever see you again. Least of all, babysitting a little rat in this godforsaken shack. Elias straightened slowly, keeping his hands visible but ready. Danny, he said evenly, using the old name like a knife. What are you doing here? The younger man's smile didn't reach his eyes. It's Rufus now. Danny died in a cell because his dear uncle thought he could play lawman. His gaze flicked to Clara, cowering against her father's bones. And look what we've got here. Little Clara Wynne, guarding Daddy's treasure. Ain't that right, sweetheart? Clara's lips trembled, but she didn't speak. Behind Rufus, his men fanned out. Harlan Pike, scarred and cruel, crouched near the window, rifle ready. Another man kicked at the dirt, grinning like he'd already decided who would die first. Elias's mind worked fast. He was outnumbered 5-1, trapped in a single-room cabin with a terrified child and a secret worth killing for. His choices were knife-thin: fight now and risk Clara's life, or bide his time and pray for a sliver of opportunity. Rufus, Elias said, his voice steady despite the storm in his chest, you don't need to do this. Walk away and no one else has to die today. The outlaw laughed, a harsh sound that bounced off the rotting walls. No one else has to die? Uncle, people like us were born to bury someone. Question is, who goes first? The tension coiled like a drawn bow, and in that suffocating moment, Elias remembered the boy he'd once tried to save. He remembered standing outside that jail cell years ago, telling himself it was the right thing to let him face the law. And now that decision was standing in front of him with a gun and a grudge. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the dead branches, carrying sand through the cracked walls. Inside, time seemed to slow. Elias's hand twitched near his revolver. Clara's breath came in shallow gasps. Rufus Kane tilted his head, eyes glittering like a rattlesnake ready to strike. Whatever happened next would carve blood into the desert. The air inside the cabin grew heavy, thick with the smell of dust, sweat, and the faint, lingering scent of death. Elias Granger stood a few feet from Clara Wynne, his fingers twitching near his revolver, eyes locked on Rufus Kane. Harlan Pike, the scar-faced brute, shifted his weight and grinned like a wolf. Boss, he said, his voice a gravelly rasp, let's quit talking. The girl knows where the gold is. She's been guarding it all this time, just like the story said. Rufus took a slow step forward, his spurs ringing softly against the wood floor. His dark eyes slid to Clara. Sweetheart, he drawled, voice dripping with mock gentleness. Why don't you tell your uncle and me where Daddy hid all that pretty Carson City gold? Clara's lips trembled. Her small hands clenched the edge of her torn dress. Papa said, I can't tell, she whispered. If I tell, everyone dies. Pike snorted. Cute. Kid thinks she's in a ghost story. He reached for her, and in that instant, Elias moved. His revolver cleared leather with a speed honed by years on the trail. The sound of the hammer cocking cut through the air like a blade. Touch her, and you lose the hand, Elias said, his voice low and flat. Pike froze, his fingers inches from Clara's shoulder. Rufus, instead of flinching, laughed. It was a cold, humorless sound that made the girl shiver. There he is, Rufus said, tilting his head. The man who raised me to shoot straight and trust no one. Only difference now is, I learned to stop hesitating. The room felt like a powder keg. One twitch, one wrong breath, and everything would explode. Then Clara broke the silence with a whisper that chilled Elias to his core. The gold, it's with him, with Papa. All eyes shifted to the skeleton in the corner. The pale bones gleamed in the shafts of sunlight like a grim sentinel. Rufus's grin faltered. What do you mean with him? Clara swallowed, her voice cracking as the truth spilled out. Papa, he swallowed the map. He said it had to die with him. He made me promise to guard his bones. If anyone wanted the gold, they'd have to take him first. The room went deathly still. Even the wind outside seemed to pause. Elias's chest tightened. He finally understood the hell this child had been living in. She hadn't just been protecting a skeleton. She had been protecting a legacy of blood and greed, carrying a burden no child should ever bear. Harlan Pike spat on the floor. Then we bust the bones open and take the map. Simple. Elias's gun hand tensed. You'll do no such thing. Rufus's eyes narrowed, calculating. The outlaw leader was no fool. He could see the lines of loyalty and blood drawn in the dirt. Uncle, he said softly, you're outnumbered, outgunned, and cornered. You can't save the girl, the gold, in your own hide. So tell me, which one do you let go? For a heartbeat, Elias said nothing. His life had been a string of choices like this, hard, ugly, and soaked in regret. He thought of the boy Rufus used to be, trailing after him through the canyons, eager to learn to ride and shoot. He thought of Clara, her eyes too old for her young face, and the years she'd spent as a prisoner to grief and fear. None, Elias said finally, his voice steel. And then the world erupted. The first gunshot shattered the silence, splinters flying from the cabin wall. Elias dove behind the stone hearth, dragging Clara with him as bullets tore through the air. Dust and wood fragments rained down. Rufus barked orders to his men, boots thudding on the floorboards. Clara clutched Elias's arm, shaking. We have to go. Papa showed me. A way out. His eyes snapped to hers. A way out! She nodded frantically. A tunnel. Under the floor. He said, only if the bad men came back. Another bullet ricocheted off the fireplace, showering them with grit. Elias's mind worked fast. A hidden tunnel could be their only chance. But moving men exposing themselves to 5 armed men with itchy trigger fingers. He glanced at the skeleton one last time, at the life and death it represented, then back to the terrified girl clinging to him. Survival and loyalty wrestled in his chest, but in the end, he knew his path. Show me, he said. As Clara scrambled to the loose floorboards behind the fireplace, Elias prepared for the next, deadliest part of the fight. The cabin wasn't just a trap anymore. It was a tomb waiting to claim whoever made the first mistake. Elias Granger's heart pounded as Clara Wynne pried up the warped floorboards behind the stone hearth. Dust swirled in the dim light, carrying the scent of dry rot and old earth. Beneath the planks yawned a dark opening, narrow, suffocating, and reeking of damp soil. Down, Elias ordered. He crouched low, scanning the room. Bullets thunked into the wall above him, sending splinters across his back. Harlan Pike barked a laugh from the doorway. Where you gonna run, old man? That little rat can't hide forever. Elias ignored the taunt. He helped Clara lower herself into the darkness, her thin frame disappearing into the ground like a shadow. He dropped in after her, pulling the boards back just as another shot tore through the cabin, scattering shards of wood into the hole. The earth swallowed them in darkness. The damp air smelled of old dirt as Elias crouched low, his shoulders brushing the tunnel walls behind Clara. Behind them, muffled voices rumbled through the floor. Boots thudded, and then the distinct metallic click of rifles being reloaded echoed above. Clara whispered, Papa dug this himself. Said it was our last chance if the bad men ever came back. Elias could almost see the ghost of Jedediah Wynne carving out this tunnel by lamplight, shovel in hand, fueled by paranoia and love for his daughter. He felt a grudging respect for the man. Even in death, he was still trying to shield his child from a brutal world. The tunnel twisted sharply, forcing Elias to crawl on his elbows, Colt in one hand. His knees scraped the packed dirt. Behind him, the faint scrape of boots and the distant echo of voices told him that Rufus Kane's men weren't far behind. Faster, Clara, he whispered. She crawled ahead, her small hands and bare feet moving quick as a prairie fox. They emerged into a narrow underground chamber where the air was cooler, tinged with the metallic tang of water. Light filtered down from a small shaft, revealing another tunnel veering left. Which way? Elias asked. Clara hesitated, biting her lip. Papa said, always left if you're lost underground. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. Elias nodded. Left it is. As they crawled, Elias's mind churned. He thought about Rufus, about the boy he'd once tried to save from the same life that had consumed Jedediah Wynne. Out here, blood meant almost nothing. Family could kill you faster than strangers. The tunnel narrowed again before sloping upward. Clara scrambled ahead, emerging behind a cluster of rocks near an old half-collapsed well. Elias followed, squinting against the sudden burst of sunlight. The desert stretched before them, open and unforgiving, but free. Then a voice boomed across the hardpan. "This is Captain Silas Ward of the United States Cavalry. Lay down your arms." Elias froze. Across the ridge, a dozen soldiers on horseback fanned out, rifles raised. The sun caught their brass buttons and steel barrels, turning them into a wall of authority and danger. Clara gasped, clutching Elias's arm. "Are they here to save us?" Elias's gut told him the truth before his mouth could form the words. "They're here for the gold," he muttered. From the cabin, distant gunfire erupted as Rufus Kane's men scrambled to respond. The soldiers didn't wait. Two dismounted, moving toward the well and the rocks where Elias and Clara crouched. "Identify yourself!" one of them barked. Elias raised his hand slowly. "Name's Elias Granger. I've got a child here, Clara Wynne. She's unarmed." The name caused a stir among the soldiers. Murmurs passed between them, and the captain himself rode closer, his eyes sharp and cold fixed on the girl. "Jedediah Wynne's daughter," he said flatly. "Where's your father?" Clara hesitated. Her voice was small. He's gone." Ward's gaze hardened. "Then you carry what he left behind. Do you have it?" Elias frowned. "What are you talking about?" The captain's voice dropped. "The payroll. Federal gold taken during the war. Wynne was supposed to return it or account for it." Elias's mind spun. All this death and misery over government gold. Then Clara's small hand trembled as she reached into her dress and pulled out a folded yellowed piece of paper. "Papa said, if everything went bad, give them this." Elias took it carefully. In the harsh sunlight, the document's seal glinted. A presidential pardon, signed by Ulysses S. Grant himself. The words were clear. Jedediah Wynne acted under federal orders as an intelligence operative. Elias let out a slow breath. The man the world had called an outlaw had been a spy. The sun was setting over the Nevada desert, casting the world in amber and rose. Long shadows stretched across the sand, swallowing the abandoned cabin and its grim secrets. The air, once thick with gunpowder and fear, now carried only the whisper of the wind. Elias Granger stood by as two cavalrymen carefully lifted the brittle remains of Jedediah Wynne from the tunnel exit. They wrapped the bones in a Union flag, handling them with a reverence that made Clara Wynne's small shoulders shake with silent sobs. For years she had guarded those bones alone, a child soldier in a war no one else could see. Now, at last, her father would be carried with honor, not shame. Captain Silas Ward removed his hat as the final rays of sunlight struck the wagon carrying Jedediah's remains. "He served his country, even if the world called him an outlaw," Ward said solemnly. "The record will reflect that." Clara sniffled and leaned against Elias. For the first time since he'd met her, her eyes held something other than fear. They held release. Nearby, Rufus Kane knelt in the dust, wrists bound in iron. The man who had once swaggered into the cabin like a wolf now looked more like a weary dog. Elias approached, crouching to meet his nephew's tired gaze. "You're lucky," Elias said quietly. "If the soldiers hadn't come, this desert would have swallowed us all." Rufus gave a dry laugh. "Guess I finally ran out of roads to ride." He glanced toward Clara, then back to his uncle. I didn't want it to end like this." For the first time in years, Elias saw a flicker of the boy he had once tried to save. A boy who had chased adventure and fallen into darkness. "Maybe," Elias said. "You've got one more chance left. Don't waste it." The cavalry would take Rufus to face justice, but Captain Ward had already hinted that his cooperation in ending the standoff might grant him mercy. In the Wild West, redemption didn't always come clean, but sometimes it came at the last possible moment. As the desert cooled, Elias walked Clara to the wagon that would take her east. A distant aunt and uncle, people she had never met, would give her a home. She clutched a small bundle to her chest, a faded ribbon and the dried flowers she had left for her father in that lonely cabin. "I'll come visit you," Elias said softly, though he wasn't sure he would. The frontier had a way of keeping men like him on the move. "Thank you," Clara whispered. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were clear now. For seeing me." He tipped his hat. "You're a brave girl, Clara Wynne. Don't ever forget that." The wagon rolled away, leaving twin tracks in the sand. Elias watched until it disappeared over the ridge, until the only sound was the wind in the sagebrush. He felt the weight of the day settle into his bones, the lives lost, the secrets unearthed, the small spark of hope carried east in that wagon. As he mounted his horse, Elias thought about the truth of the frontier. People romanticize the Wild West as a land of endless skies and daring gunfights. But out here, survival often depended on silence, loyalty, and the ability to carry unbearable burdens. Families could break as easily as dry twigs. Trust could kill as surely as a bullet. He glanced one last time at the cabin, now half in shadow, and murmured to himself, "The West ain't just about outlaws and gold. It's about the scars we carry and the choices we make when nobody's watching." With that, he turned his horse toward the horizon, a solitary figure swallowed by the vastness of the desert. One more soul carrying the weight of loyalty, loss, and redemption into the fading light. And so, the story of Elias Granger, Clara Wynne, and the ghost of Jedediah Wynne closes under the wide desert sky. But as the dust settles, this tale leaves behind more than the echo of gunshots or the shimmer of hidden gold. It leaves questions that speak to our lives today. In the Wild West, loyalty often came with a heavy price. Clara's devotion to her father kept her chained, literally and emotionally, long after he was gone. How many of us, even in today's modern world, carry invisible chains of our own? Family expectations, old grudges, or secrets we inherit can weigh us down, just like the desert shackled Clara to her past. Elias's journey reminds us that doing the right thing is rarely easy. Sometimes we are forced to choose between loyalty to family and loyalty to our conscience. In a world where right and wrong can blur, whether in business, politics, or personal life, are we strong enough to protect the innocent, even if it costs us? And then there's Rufus Cain, a man who rode the line between villain and victim. His faint glimmer of redemption asks us, do people deserve a second chance, even after terrible mistakes? I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you were in Elias's boots, would you forgive family betrayal or risk your life to save a stranger? Share in the comments below. Thank you for riding through this tale with us. If you found meaning in this story, please give it a like. Share it with someone who loves a good Western, and subscribe for more stories that carry lessons across generations. Out here, every sunset leaves a question on the horizon. What will your answer be?